Picture this. An Athenian counselor named Lycidas stands up in a crowded assembly on the island of Salamis. He raises his hand and makes a logical suggestion. Maybe we should listen to the Persian peace offer. The crowd doesn't boo. They don't argue. Instead, the other counselors surround him and stone him to death right on the floor of the debate hall. But it doesn't end there. The women of Athens, hearing the commotion, rush to Lycidas' house, drag his wife and children into the street, and stone them to death too. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This was the reality of 479 BC. The Greeks were done with diplomacy. They were traumatized, homeless, and bloodthirsty. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae were dead. Athens was a smoking ruin, and the only language left was violence. This is the Battle of Plataea, the story of how the Greeks stopped being victims and became butchers. That murder of Lycidas proves one thing: the Greeks were desperate. King Xerxes had left, but the threat hadn't. He left behind General Mardonius, a man far more dangerous than the king. He sat in the plains of Boeotia with 300,000 of the empire's deadliest killers, effectively holding a knife to the throat of Greece. He burned Athens a second time, just to prove a point. I am still here. The Athenians, living as refugees, had reached their breaking point. They sent runners to Sparta with a message that wasn't a plea for help. It was a threat. If you don't march now, the Athenian navy joins Persia, and when that happens, your walls won't save you. Faced with the prospect of a Persian-Athenian alliance, the Spartan war machine finally kicked into gear. In a single night, the ephors issued a mobilization order that defies belief. They emptied the city. 5,000 Spartiates, the elite of the elite, suited up. But here's the detail that shows their intent. They brought the slaves. For every single Spartan warrior, 7 Helot slaves were armed and ordered to march. That's 35,000 conscripted servants marching to war alongside their masters. Combined with provincial troops, a massive column of 45,000 men vanished from the Peloponnese before sunrise. When the Athenian envoys woke up the next morning to scream at the Spartan leaders, the ephors simply said, "You can stop shouting. The army is already at the border." While the Spartans were marching north, General Mardonius was making his move. And this is where we need to correct a massive misconception. In pop culture, the Persians are often depicted as a mindless horde. That's propaganda, pure and simple. The army Mardonius kept in Greece was a lean, professional killing machine of 300,000 men. These were the immortals who had broken the Spartan line at Thermopylae. These were the Saka horse archers from the Central Asian steppes, men who could put an arrow through a greave slit while riding at full gallop. Mardonius was relying on speed, mobility, and superior tactical flexibility. When his scouts reported that the Spartans had left the Peloponnese, Mardonius smiled. He knew he couldn't fight the heavy Greek hoplites in narrow streets. He needed room to maneuver, so he ordered Athens to be razed to the ground. Everything still standing, walls, houses, temples, was pulled down, smashed, or burned. He turned Athens into a graveyard of broken stone. Then Mardonius withdrew north into Boeotia, near Thebes. This wasn't a retreat, it was a trap. He set up camp along the Asopus River in the flat, open plains of Plataea. On flat ground, his cavalry could dance around the slow Greek phalanx and pepper them with arrows until they broke. He built a massive, fortified stockade and sat back, waiting for the Greeks to walk into the slaughterhouse. The allied Greek army arrived at the southern edge of the plain. They looked down from the foothills of Mount Cithaeron and saw the ocean of Persian tents, the glittering armor of the immortals, the thousands of horses. The Greek commanders, led by the Spartan regent Pausanias, did the only smart thing. They stopped. They refused to go down onto the plain. They hugged the rocky slopes where the Persian cavalry couldn't reach them. It became a high-stakes staring contest. Days passed. Mardonius grew impatient. He sent his cavalry commander Mecistius, a giant of a figure riding a Nicene stallion with a bridle made of solid gold. He led cavalry right up the slopes to harass the Greek lines. They rode in circles, jeering and raining arrows down on the exposed Greek infantry. The Megarians were pinned down and on the verge of routing. but 300 Athenians stepped forward and rushed down to support them. In the chaotic skirmish that followed, an arrow struck Mecisteus' horse in the flank. The beast reared up, throwing the commander to the ground. The Athenians swarmed him, but they couldn't kill him. Mecisteus was wearing a suit of scale armor. Under his purple tunic that was impenetrable, their swords were bouncing off. He was fighting back, a gold-clad tank, until one soldier jammed the spike of his spear through the eye-hole of his helmet. The giant fell. The Greeks hoisted his body onto a cart and paraded it through the ranks. They had drawn first blood. The euphoria didn't last long. It was August. The Greek sun hammered down on men encased in 60 pounds of bronze armor. Pausanias looked at his army and realized they were far from a reliable water source. Emboldened by their small victory, Pausanias ordered a maneuver. The entire Greek line shuffled down toward the Asopus River, settling near the Gargaphia Spring. It seemed like a good idea. It wasn't. Donius watched them move. The Greeks had just extended their neck. Their supply lines stretching back through the mountain passes were now exposed. In a masterstroke of logistical warfare, Persian horsemen circled around and struck the mountain passes. They intercepted a massive convoy of 500 supply wagons, slaughtering the oxen and drivers. The Greek army was completely cut off from food. For 8 long days, the two armies sat there. The Greeks couldn't move forward because the open ground was a death sentence. They couldn't move back without looking like cowards. Every day, the Persian cavalry would launch volleys of arrows and ride away laughing. But Pausanias held the line. Then came the breaking point. On the 11th day, Mardonius ordered his cavalry to hit the Gargaphia Spring. The Persian horses trampled the spring, churning the clear water into undrinkable mud. In ours, the only water source for 100,000 men was destroyed. Pausanias realized he had no choice. If they stayed, the army would dissolve from thirst or mutiny. He made one of the most dangerous maneuvers in warfare: a tactical retreat at night in the face of the enemy. The plan was simple: withdraw to high ground near fresh water. But as soon as the signal was given, the coalition fell apart. The center of the Greek line panicked and sprinted all the way back to the town of Plataea, effectively taking themselves out of the fight. In the dark, the Greek army had just lost 50% of its manpower. But on the right wing, the problem was pride. Captain Amampharidas refused to retreat. He told the region of Sparta that he would not bring shame upon his country by running from the Persians. The army is trying to sneak away, and Pausanias is having a screaming match with his own captain. Amampharidas picked up a massive rock and slammed it down at Pausanias' feet, shouting, "With this pebble, I cast my vote not to flee from the strangers." Pausanias, exhausted and furious, decided to leave Amampharidas behind, hoping he would follow. The main Spartan column began to march, and sure enough, when Amampharidas realized he was being abandoned to face 300,000 Persians alone, he finally cracked and ordered his men to catch up. But it was too late. The sky was turning gray. Now, the sun was cresting over the mountains. From the Persian camp, the sentries saw the Greek position. The center was gone. The Athenians were miles away. Isolated and exposed were the Spartans, strung out in a long, disorganized line. Mardonius saw a rout. He didn't see a tactical retreat. He saw a broken army fleeing in terror. He pointed at the retreating red cloaks and yelled, "Get them!" The Persian cavalry surged forward. The elite immortals began to run, screaming their war cries. Just a massive, chaotic stampede. Pausanias heard the sound first, a low rumble, then a roar. He looked at the Athenians far away, unable to help. He was alone. 10,000 Spartans and 35,000 slaves against the entire Persian Empire. The Battle of Plataea had officially begun, and the Spartans were caught flat, dash-footed mare. Ordered his archers, tens of thousands of them, to plant their wicker shields in the ground and darken the sky. The Spartans and their Tegean allies were stranded on the open slopes. They were caught mid-march as arrows unleashed volley after volley. Pausanias ordered the army to halt and drop to one knee. Then, amidst the screaming of dying men, he turned his back on the enemy. He called for a priest, needed to perform a sacrifice. In the ancient Greek world, you did not fight until the gods gave you the green light. A goat was dragged forward. Pausanias slit its throat and inspected the liver for omens. The signs were bad. The gods said no, so Pausanias waited. Imagine being a soldier in that line. You're crouching behind your shield, hearing arrows striking bronze, hearing screams as arrows find gaps in armor, and your general is staring at a goat's entrails. The helots, the slaves, were dying in droves. They were watching their masters stand like statues, refusing to fight back while the world ended around them. The slaughter was passive and excruciatingly slow. One Spartan named Callicrates, the most beautiful man in the Greek army, was struck by an arrow. Dying slowly, his last words were, "I do not mind dying for Greece. What I mind is that I die without having struck a blow." Another goat was brought up, throat slit. Bad omens. Wait, the Persian infantry moved closer, pouring fire into the motionless ranks. The Tegeans couldn't take it anymore, ready to charge without orders. Pausanias looked up to the temple of Hera, tears streaming down his face, screaming a prayer to the goddess. By forcing them to suffer in place, Pausanias was keeping the formation tight. Finally, a third goat was sacrificed. The liver was good. The omens had shifted. Pausanias stood up and simply raised his spear. The iron discipline that had kept 10,000 men frozen suddenly released. The Spartans exploded forward. The pent-up rage of an hour of passive dying was about to be unleashed. The collision was the sickening crunch of wood shattering under bronze. The Persians had set up wicker shields to protect their archers. When Pausanias lowered his spear, the Spartans surged forward like a dam bursting. They crashed into the Persian line with such force that the front ranks of the immortals were physically lifted off their feet and trampled. The wicker wall disintegrated instantly. The Persians were brave. Herodotus describes them grabbing the Spartan spears with their bare hands and snapping the shafts. They threw themselves at the wall of shields with daggers, trying to find gaps. They fought with ferocity, but courage cannot defeat physics. The Persians wore linen tunics or scale armor designed to stop arrows, not heavy thrusts. The Spartans were encased in bronze from chin to knee. When a Persian struck a Spartan, his blade glanced off. When a Spartan struck a Persian, he went through bone. The Spartans drew their xiphos, short sword designed for close-quarters butchery. They moved with robotic efficiency, stab to the face, bash with the shield, step forward, repeat. The helots swarmed into the gaps with slings, javelins, and knives, finishing off the wounded. The dust rose so thick that men fought by silhouette and sound. In the center of this chaos was Mardonius on a magnificent white charger, surrounded by his elite bodyguard of 1,000 men. He was fighting brilliantly. His presence held the Persian army together. The Spartans realized this was a headhunting mission. The phalanx began to grind toward the man on the white horse. They ignored gold and silver jewelry. They wanted the head of the man who burned Athens. The circle around Mardonius was shrinking. The 1,000 elite Persians guarding him were dying one by one. History records the name of the man who delivered the final blow, Mnestis. He spotted Mardonius on his white horse. Mnestis lunged. The blow was catastrophic. The general of the Persian Empire was knocked from his horse and slammed into the bloody dirt. He didn't get up. The moment Mardonius hit the ground, the sound of battle changed. The immortals, seeing their leader fallen, finally broke and ran. But Artabazus, the second in command with 40,000 men, watched from a distance. Instead of charging to save the day, he turned his horse around and ordered his 40,000 men to march straight out of Greece. He abandoned the army too. Its fate. The remaining Persian forces, leaderless and terrified, panicked and rooted toward the wooden stockade. They scrambled inside, barred the gates, and climbed the towers. They had just trapped themselves. The Spartans arrived, but Spartans were terrible at siege warfare. They paced below like frustrated wolves. Then the Athenians arrived. They breached the stockade, tore down a section of the rampart, and through that breach poured the full fury of the Greeks. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Greeks didn't take prisoners. They moved through the crowded camp where tens of thousands of Persians were trapped and killed, everything that moved. It was methodical extermination, the frustration of Thermopylae, the anger over Athens, the misery of thirsty days, all taken. Out on the trapped Persians, ancient sources claim only 3,000 survived the day. When the screaming stopped, a strange silence fell. But as the Greeks wiped the blood from their eyes, they realized they were standing on a fortune. Persian camp was a mobile palace. Gold mixing bowls, silver tables, tapestries woven with purple dye, chests overflowing with coins. For the Greeks, especially the Spartans whose currency was heavy iron bars, this was like a fever dream. General Pausanias, still covered in battle grime, walked into Mardonius' pavilion. He saw the Persian chefs cowering in the corner. Instead of killing them, Pausanias gave them a bizarre order. He told them to prepare a meal exactly as they would have for Mardonius. The chefs roasted exotic meats, baked soft breads, opened jars of sweet wine, and laid out a feast on silver platters. Then Pausanias ordered his Spartan cooks to prepare a standard Spartan mess. They threw lentils, pork blood, and vinegar into a pot and boiled it into the infamous black broth. Pausanias placed the two meals side by side. He called his commanders in, pointed to the Persian feast, then to the Spartan slop, and started laughing. Men of Greece, look at how he lived. He had all this luxury, yet he came here to rob us, who have so little. It was profound. Irony. The Persians had everything to lose. The Greeks had nothing to lose but their freedom. But it was also a warning. Pausanias stood there mocking the gold, acting the incorruptible Spartan. But history tells us that as he stared at that gold, something inside him broke. The victory at Plataea saved Greece, but it doomed Pausanias. While the blood was drying, the Greek fleet launched an assault on Persian remnants at Mycale. They burned the Persian ships and effectively ended the Persian wars. The West was saved. But the end of the war was the beginning of tragedy. The alliance between Sparta and Athens was always a marriage of convenience. Once the prey was dead, they looked at each other with suspicion. Athens returned home as conquerors, rebuilt their walls, built a massive fleet, and formed the Delian League, an empire demanding tribute. But the darkest shadow fell upon Pausanias himself. Remember that feast? He wasn't mocking it because he hated it. He was mocking it because he wanted it. Slowly, bizarre reports reached the Spartan ephors. Pausanias was no longer acting like a Spartan. He stopped wearing the rough red cloak and was seen wearing purple robes of a Persian satrap. He hired a bodyguard of Egyptians and Persians. The savior of Western civilization had become a traitor. Rumors swirled that he was writing letters to Xerxes, offering to deliver Greece to Persia. The Spartans recalled him and put him on trial, but he was acquitted. But Pausanias continued his intrigues, allegedly stirring up the Helots, promising them freedom. To a Spartan, arming the Helots was unforgivable. The ephors set a trap. They had a servant hide while Pausanias discussed his treasonous plans. Evidence was secured. The victor of Plataea was now a hunted man in his own city. As the ephors marched to arrest him, Pausanias ran to the temple of Athena, claiming sanctuary. The ephors couldn't drag him out without angering the gods, so they came up with a uniquely Spartan solution. They ordered the doors to be bricked up. Legend tells us that as Spartans gathered stones, an old woman walked through the crowd. Was Pausanias' own mother? She didn't cry. She simply picked up a heavy stone, walked to the temple door, and placed it on the threshold in silence. Then she walked away. By placing that first stone, she was voting for his death. For days, the hero of Plataea sat in the darkness. No food, no water. Just moments before his heart stopped, they dragged his emaciated body out so he wouldn't pollute the holy ground. He died a prisoner, a traitor, and a disgrace. This is why we don't make movies about Plataea. It's messy. The hero becomes a villain. The good guys commit war crimes. The victory leads to greed. Compare that to Thermopylae. Thermopylae is clean. The 300 die beautiful and noble. We prefer the beautiful defeat to the ugly victory. We prefer the martyr Leonidas to the conqueror Pausanias. But we must not forget the truth. Thermopylae was a symbol, but Plataea was the salvation. It was at Plataea that 10,000 Spartans and their allies did the impossible. They proved that a free people fighting for their homes could break the back of a global superpower. It was brutal, savage, and necessary. So the next time you hear about the 300 Spartans, remember the 10,000 who came after them. Remember the vengeance, remember the victory, and remember the price.